So now we're going to start with part 3. Part 3 is all about deconstructing his profile, or any profile. In deconstructing the profile, what we want to do is to talk about the internal structure of these perspectives, without necessarily calling them to name yet, what name they are, but the internal subscores within each of the 5. So each of the 5 perspectives is made up of 3 subscores. There's a score for intentionality or intentions, there's a score for actions, what does he do, and there's a score for beliefs. Beliefs is generally about 2 things. What does he believe about learning, and what does he believe about teaching or the role of a teacher? So that's the first part of this 3rd section. The second part is we're going to look for internal consistencies across this. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. And then the last part of this, the 3rd part of the 3rd section, will deal with internal discrepancies. You'll see where that goes in a moment too. So I'm going to start now with Tom and remind him of what he just said at the end of the last section. So Tom, what you just said was very interesting at the last of the 2nd section. You said, I enjoy being, or I feel comfortable being, a more nurturing perspective teacher or nurturing teacher. You named the perspective nurturing. That name has been something of a problem for me with some people, but it doesn't seem to be a problem for you at all, because you went on to say, letting people go their own way on this without a script and encouraging them, giving them encouragement along the way. So let me take that as the entry into this section and talk about the internal scores within these things. And I want to ask you, first of all, which score did you have in here that was highest in intentions? There are 3 scores. There's an intention score, an action score, and a belief score in each of these 5 perspectives. And by letters, they're, I, B, A. So where's your highest intention score?
It would also be a nurturing as well.
What does it mean for you to have a high intention score in that perspective?
For me, it means at the end of the class, session, term, what do I want to have people walking out of here with? What do I want them to feel like? Hey, that was a great session, I learned a lot, or I want to take the next step, or I feel like what we're doing is a good and noble cause, or I want to go out and change the world, whatever. It could be something big or something small.
Okay. So where is your 2nd highest intention score in here?
2nd highest would be developmental.
What does that mean to you?
Again, same thing. Under developmental would be, okay, how are they learning? Am I part of the learning process? Am I motivating them along the way? Like, what is the motivator that keeps them and me going? I find for me, when I'm up there, when I'm standing, sitting, if I'm involved with people, if they're motivated, I'm motivated. It's a very cyclical, great feedback mechanism.
What's the difference between what you said on nurturing and developmental in terms of your intentionality?
And how I feel, there's not a lot of difference at all. And how it comes out in the wash in terms of the differences, the technical differences between developmental and nurturing perspectives, it may be okay. Under nurturing, I want to create an environment whereby people feel cared about. They feel like Tom cares about me, he's helping me through this process, he's encouraging me, he's supporting me. In the nurturing process, or developmental process rather, hey, Tom's created an environment where he's helping me to become a better learner. The learner is the center of the process. He's developing my abilities as a learner.
So what's important so far in what you've said about both of those, it doesn't matter how you differentiate so much between the 2, but they're very, very harmonious, the 2 for you.
Yes.
And what they do is center the learner. The
Absolutely.
learner is the center of everything you just said, the focal point of everything you've just said. Is that right?
Yes, I've learned the hard way what happens when you don't do it that way.
Okay. So that seems very consistent with a struggle you're having between another perspective or orientation to teaching and this. But let's come back to that in a moment too. So if that's the focal point of your intentionality between those 2, where is it lowest, your intentionality score?
That would be in transmission, followed by social reform.
Okay, why is it low there? What do you think it's low there? What does that mean to you? That you're not trying to do or trying not to do?
I want someone to walk away from whatever we're doing wanting to learn more, wanting to feel like they've gotten something out of it. Whereas under another perspective, say transmission, where if I'm just giving information, I expect them to learn it and to memorize it and to score high on it or to apply it in the correct way, well, where does intention go with that? My role ends when they walk out the door.
Okay. And another thing that you've told me is that you took this before and it changed dramatically. So January you took it and then April you took it. What changed between those two?
So in a year and a half, almost a year and a half, my transmission score dropped a huge amount.
Do you know whether it was in beliefs, intentions, or actions?
No, I could look that up though.
No, I do know.
Yeah.
So it changed in beliefs and intentions,
Okay.
but not in actions at all. So that's where we're going to go in the next section, which is you've got a really interesting discrepancy in that perspective, that transmission perspective, which may be the clue to this tension you're still struggling with. We'll get to there in the next section as we get into, well, we're going there now, discrepancies. It's in this section, actually. So let's now talk about discrepancies, internal discrepancies, where an internal discrepancy is where within a perspective you have 4 or more point difference between beliefs, intentions, or actions, between two of those. So in Tom's profile here, he has a belief score of 7, an intention score of 5, and an action score of 13. So the discrepancy is at least 6 between beliefs and actions, but it's, what, 8? A discrepancy of 8 between intentions and actions. So what that says, Tom, if I just look at the numbers there, on transmission, your intention is down around 5. That's the lowest intentionality on the whole profile. You're really clear about what you don't want to accomplish. But your actions are 13, and the highest they can possibly be is only 15. Why might that be so?
Well, when I look at my actions between that perspective or any of the others, they all tend to be pretty high. Maybe I walk into an environment thinking, okay, here's all the things I'm going to be doing. That's my intention. But as the process goes along, and I am learner-oriented, like I want to know what's happening, what are people feeling, what are they thinking, what are they getting out of this moment by moment. Maybe I adapt by saying, okay, this is working and this isn't working. I'm going to try this now. I'm going to do that now. I'm going to throw this into the mix. Hey, we're going to stop the PowerPoint right now, take a little break, have some group work. I find that when I'm out there, I'm very adaptive. I feel like I have feelers out all the time, when no matter how big or how small the group is, figuring, okay, are they getting something out of this, or is it just me? Is it working? Is it not working?
So I wonder if there's another reason for that, for this discrepancy. Very often when you have someone as experienced as you are, they've come through the process of learning to teach by watching others teach them. So the role models they have in their head, either wittingly or unwittingly, are role models of a particular kind of teacher doing particular things. Do you have some teachers in your past that were doing a lot of the things that are common to a transmission perspective of teaching? Let me say what those might be. There's a well-defined body of knowledge. It has to be learned in its authorized form. It's structured and oriented in a particular way. We go through it in a particular sequence. It's fairly absolute in how it must be known. And there's reasons for that. It could be legal reasons. It could be negotiation reasons. It could be any number of things. Does any of that give you an understanding of why maybe your teaching actions are hard to change?
100%. My field is legal, and a lot of the people I deal with are lawyers. And for a while, I was almost employed at a law firm. The law is black and white. It is what it is. And lawyers have a very, by and large, sweeping generalization, a very distinct way of teaching. It's very rote, it's very old-fashioned, it's very British in how it appears. And that's changing. But that being said, I'm used to an environment where I'll walk into a conference, I'll walk into a presentation. There may or may not be a PowerPoint. They will follow the PowerPoint strictly. You'll have a very thick binder of materials. There'll be cases at the end of it. You'll walk through each case. You go through the precedent, how the precedent could affect future law, how it should be interpreted. And there is just that one interpretation. You're not encouraged to be creative at all.
So there are two things that seem clear to me in that. Number one, there's a strong cultural normative way of teaching.
Absolutely.
And you were trained in that. You were raised in that, if not trained in that. You were educated and trained in that in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But secondly, it sounds like you have an obligation to cover a certain amount of material.
Legally, we are required to, because the breadth of the workers' compensation law is so large that in order to prepare someone or to prevent a due diligence lawsuit, we have to make sure there are certain foundations that are covered. In my field, if a person makes an error, even a simple error, that could result in being sued. The lawsuit could be for millions of dollars. So I have a legal obligation and an ethical one to make sure that people who are walking out there have some kind of foundation, that they're protected in some way.
Okay. Well, let's leave that as it is for the moment, because that's not something you mentioned at the front end of our conversation that was really troubling you. Rather, what you were more concerned about was apprenticeship pulling against developmental, which means, should I really role model for them and tell them how by showing them how? Or shall I let them get in there and muck about with it and figure it out for themselves? Is that the struggle you were talking about at the front
I
end?
still struggle now.
Okay. So now it's not too distant to go from transmission, that is, giving them these things, to role modeling where you're doing these things for them. What do you think is the strength of, or the difference between the two for you? Apprenticeship, which is usually learning in the workplace, learning alongside others who are experienced, or if it's in a classroom, learning from people who are experienced practitioners. What's the difference for you between these two perspectives as it relates to you?
I find with more transmission, I'm giving you information, you look at it, you absorb it, we go from there, and I judge you based on how much you've absorbed it and can relate it to the environment around you. In transmission, I'm going to work with you. I'm going to model those behaviors. There's more of a feedback mechanism where I will sit with you or someone else, and we're going to break it down the steps. You're going to show me what you know. It's more of an interactive environment. It's less one way, way less one way.
Okay. So I look back at your profile, and it looks to me like, and I'm a strong believer that intentions are the most important thing in here. If I look back at intentions, they're, as you've said before, they're the highest in nurturing. They're 14 out of 15. They're second highest in developmental. They're 11 out of 15. If we stay with those for a moment, let me tell you what I think that means for you and ask you if that's the case. It means that, first of all, I'm going to stay with developmental. You want people to reason really well about what it is they're to learn here. So they have to have a foundation of knowledge with which to reason. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And that foundational knowledge has to be very particular. It has to be authentic. It has to be according to the law. It has to not find any fault in case something comes up. But then they have to use it to reason. So it would be easy to get caught in giving them more without letting them reason more. And I wonder if that's part of the dilemma you face with role modeling versus developmental.
Yes.
How does it become a dilemma for you then?
How much do you give the person? How much rope do you give out the person before you allow them to reason?
Mm-hmm.
An error in reasoning could result in a person losing a case, someone being denied benefits, and being literally put onto welfare. Or for the person, the representative, the advocate, being sued.
Okay.
So I think there has to be this delicate balance of, okay, here's the material I've presented, in small enough bites that you can absorb it. Again, try to be learner-oriented. And we're going to work through the reasoning process. I want you to apply these facts to X scenario and see if you can do it in a reasonably correct way, noting there could be variability.
Okay. We're going to stop now with this section, and the next section is to say more or less, where do you go from here, and so what? And maybe some of that can be about how might you resolve some of the tension we've articulated in here for you. Okay?
Okay.
Let's do that.